As a nation, we are rightly proud of our armed forces. That pride has been fully justified by their conduct in the Gulf War so far. As they, with our allies, face a fresh and yet sterner challenge, I hope that we can unite in praying that their success will be as swift as it is certain, and that it may be achieved with as small a cost in human life and suffering as possible. Then may the true reward of their courage be granted, a just and lasting peace.
10 of the 28 nations that make up the Allied coalition took part in the first wave of the combined ground, sea, and air attacks. When we continue our live coverage, Molly will be joined by CNN military analyst General Perry Smith. We'll be right back.
We just saw video, some first video of those Saudi troops taking the Iraqi prisoners inside of Kuwait. Your first reaction to what you saw?
Well, I think it's what so many people had hoped for, that when the ground attack took place, that it would be more of a surrendering operation with little loss of life on both sides than any kind of a major battle. At least in this case, it looks like there might have been a small little battle, but it was over quickly. The white flags went up. They had their papers in their hand to show that they're ready to surrender, and it was mopping up. Now, it's a sad story to see those prisoners, but I think they're alive, most of them, and they will be well taken care of.
You commented on the construction of the bunkers we're seeing.
Yes, so much comment on how tough the bunkers are. That is not that impressive a bunker. It's underground, and they're safe from a lot of things, but it's not those deep multi-tiered bunkers. And this, I think, is what we're going to see a lot of, and that's one of the reasons that they surrendered so quickly, because they had been beat up awfully badly by the air power.
All right, those are the Allied forces encountering some of the Iraqi POWs a few miles inside of Kuwait. When do they get to the Republican Guards, and what might they find then?
Big question. If they hit the Republican Guards, probably sometime tomorrow, initially some a little bit later today and perhaps tonight. But it's possible that Republican Guards will have chosen to depart the scene and gone back to Iraq, since they're very close to the border. So then the big question is, will they be there? Will they fight hard? That's the big open question over the course of the next 24 hours.
What kind of important strategic lessons have we learned so far? And still, this ground war is very young.
It's very young, but a couple of preliminary lessons. First of all, if you can cut off the head, the command and control head, as we did in Baghdad, so they could not control their forces well, then the battle goes easier. The second thing is, if you can sustain an air campaign without pause for a continued period of time, then the opportunity for mopping up is much better. There's some bigger, longer range strategic lessons, including, it seems to me, the whole relationship between air and land battle and the sea battle that need to be looked at very carefully.
Okay, General Perry Smith, CNN's military analyst. Thanks. Dave?
Thank you, Molly. Continuing the discussion of Allied ground strategy in our Washington studios is military analyst Greg Grant of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Grant, welcome to our news this morning.
Good morning.
Chemical weapons came up with General Schwartzkoff early this morning, and he said some of the reports about the use of chemical weapons, at least today, were bogus. Do you still expect that they will play a part?
Well, if we look at the history and the experience of the Iran-Iraq War, clearly the Iraqis used chemical weapons when they were being defeated on the battlefield. I do expect to see some kind of use of chemical weapons. It may be limited, but I'm sure that they will try to use them. But we need to remember that the main means of delivering chemical weapons is by indirect fire. Since the Iraqis have only limited and almost no capability of fighting beyond line of sight, their capability to put chemical ordnance on advancing American personnel units is very, very limited.
Wouldn't have been expected that it would have been used earlier than this?
Actually, no. Once again, if I make reference to the Iran-Iraq War, they used it when the battlefield had turned against them, when they were facing defeat and they had run out of units to put in front of advancing Iraqi units. They would use the chemical weapons. But remember, the key point here is they were fighting an infantry-paced assault, not an armored force that's moving very, very rapidly. So their capability to put that ordnance in front of advancing armored units is quite limited.
General Schwartzkoff referred to the 5,500 EPWs taken in the first 10 to 12 hours. Is that kind of a logistical nightmare, having to take them first and then care for them? Can that slow an army down?
It could slow an army down if we're seeing huge numbers of prisoners, which I do expect to see. We have to, if you look at the overall strategic plan, it's obvious that there is a flanking maneuver taking place and a number of penetrations. Clearly, the troops in the front lines, those down along the border in Kuwait, they're already prisoners in essence. They may not have been taken prisoner yet, but because they've been outflanked to the west and because the line has been penetrated, their defense is in essence collapsing, and they will inevitably be taken prisoner.
Now, this ground assault took place, got jumped off about 4 a.m. in the dark, obviously. It is light over there now, but we're approaching nighttime, or late part of the day. Iraqi capabilities in night fighting.
They don't equal the Allied capabilities, especially not those of the American forces. We're dealing with armored vehicles and aircraft that have very superior night fighting capabilities. I just don't see them matching up with the American forces or some of the other Allied units as well.
General Schwartzkoff referred to encountering some Republican Guard along the way. Would we be facing more of them, and will they live up to the billing we've heard about?
Well, I think the reports that some commentators have mentioned that the fighting is going to be a mopping up operation, it's a bit premature. I think we have yet to encounter the main armored forces of Iraq that are in northern Kuwait and southern Iraq. That's where the main resistance will come. As I said, we've already outflanked the infantry forces, the light infantry forces along the front lines in trenches, etc. We have not yet encountered the strategic and operational reserve, and these are the mobile heavy forces. And we have to remember, when speaking about the Republican Guards, they're mainly a political force. Talking to people who really know the Iraqi army, they say that the regular Iraqi units, the regular army armored and mechanized units, are indeed more formidable than the Republican Guards themselves. And I think the Republican Guards have taken a serious beating. So I think we need to look more at the overall operational reserve of the Iraqi forces, those mechanized and mobile units. That's where the stiffest resistance will come.
Where do you think with that resistance will be met?
I think we will see that shortly as the American units flanking around the west, and as the penetrations continue to develop. I think we will begin to run into those mechanized and mobile units. But we have to remember that they are not configured to stop a frontal attack. They're mainly dug in to withstand air attack. Now, that's very different than those units along the front lines, in trenches and bunkers, prepared to stop a frontal assault. These units, these mobile units, will not be configured to stop such an assault. They'll be dug in, but they will not be in such strong positions to stop an armored attack.
Mr. Grant, did you see some of the video we just ran and General Smith commented on?
Yes, I did.
Were you as surprised by those bunkers being not quite as what we had heard about, stronger than we heard about?
Well, I think I saw some graphics at one time of deep bunkers, concrete structures with multi-layers. I never expected to see anything quite like that. That's an enormous logistical undertaking to construct a bunker of that type. I'm not surprised at all to see these bunkers. That's what I was expecting. But I think we shouldn't expect that these will be a pushover. The key here is to outflank and get behind these bunkers so you don't have to actually attack them. If you're forced into clearing out each of these individual bunkers, and if the Iraqi troops decide to put up a resistance, it could be quite costly.
Greg Grant is military analyst with the Centers for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. We appreciate your sharing your expertise with us this morning.
Thank you.
Well, our coverage of the war in the Gulf will continue right after this. We go live now to Linda Scherzer in Jerusalem for the latest. Linda.
Dave, we want to update you on the situation in the occupied territories here. Once the ground war started early this morning, most of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank were put under curfew. More than 1 million Palestinians were confined to their homes this morning. The Israelis are very concerned about pro-Iraqi demonstrations that may have erupted to protest the ground war. You'll recall that when the war started, that the curfew was imposed right from the beginning of the war. It was perhaps the most restrictive curfew that was imposed since the 1967 war. Most people were confined to their homes from dawn through dusk, allowed out only for several hours during the day in order to buy basic foods and necessities. Again, that curfew has been reimposed today. We can tell you that about 6,000 Palestinians were allowed into Israel to work, but the great majority of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip have been confined to their homes. The Army tells us that this curfew is on indefinitely. This is Linda Scherzer reporting live from Jerusalem.
And that's our report for now. I'm Dave Michaels, the CNN Center in Atlanta.
I'm Molly McCoy. Stay with CNN.
Here's an update on the war in the Gulf. I'm Dave Michaels. We are now more than 15 hours into the ground war to liberate Kuwait. We are starting to receive video from the offensive. Saudi troops reportedly met little opposition as soldiers from the coalition stormed Iraq and Kuwait. Despite an official news blackout, some things are known. One U.S. Marine task force blunted a counterattack by Iraqi armor. The commander of Operation Desert Storm says over 5,000 Iraqi prisoners were taken in the first 10 hours. There are many unofficial news reports. Almost all tell of Allied successes. But U.S. officials warn against optimism. They point out that Allied forces have not yet fully engaged Iraq's well-armed and well-trained Republican guards. But General Norman Schwartzkoff says he is delighted with progress so far and with the remarkably low casualty reports.
Contact with the enemy can best be characterized as light. Coalition air forces from the United States, the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Italy, Canada, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Qatar are all conducting surge air operations to support the ground commanders, and they continue to strike key strategic targets.
Official Iraqi radio today called on all Arabs, Muslims, and, quote, people of honor to attack U.S. and Allied interests around the world. The call for revenge came after the Allies launched a full-scale assault on Iraq. Saddam Hussein, in a radio message, said Arab nations allied against Iraq are traitors.
They betrayed everybody. But God Almighty, Allah, is stronger than everyone, and He is the only one who is always watching, capable of everything, the Almighty. And He will put an end to their invasion and will give them disgrace and frustration, and they will be defeated and vanquished, these treacherous betrayers.
Baghdad Radio says its forces are turning back the offensive. Sports Week in Review is up next. We will interrupt if necessary to bring you news from the Gulf. I'm Dave Michaels. Stay with us.
This is CNN.
Getting the go-ahead for a ground offensive, Allied troops forced their way into Kuwait. This is CNN's continuing coverage of the war in the Gulf. I'm Molly McCoy.
And I'm Dave Michaels. Here's the latest. The ground portion of Operation Desert Storm apparently is proceeding with dramatic success for the Allies. Ground forces from several countries swept into Iraq and Kuwait today.
Tell me what happened.
We see one Iraqi here, and that's a Saudi soldier. Now it's, I think now it's very nice about Saudi. We want the free Kuwait, or Kuwait. No.
خلاص عيب عليكم لا
شيل هاي في واحد مصاب هنا خليه يفسخ البسطات هنا خليه يفسخ كل حاجه يفسخ كل شيء جمعوا مع طريق قصص انا بسحبك خذ راحتك بس انا بسحبك اطلع اللي ما له شغل بس يبقى واحد بس يبقى واحد يا مروحي انا عندي انحار
The Kuwaiti government in exile says the Allies dropped U.S. paratroopers in the capital of Kuwait City. Kuwaiti officials in exile also report that a Kuwaiti brigade has fought its way to the central town of Al-Jahra. The Kuwaiti officials also say the Allied forces have retaken the island of Failaka, which controls the sea approaches to the Kuwaiti harbor. Iraq Radio has broadcast a military communique denying this. Earlier, the commander of Operation Desert Storm told reporters that the Allied troops are rounding up thousands of Iraqi prisoners as they race north. General Norman Schwartzkoff also says the Allies already have reached all of their first-day objectives.
Contact with the enemy can best be characterized as light. Coalition air forces from the United States, the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Italy, Canada, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Qatar are all conducting surge air operations to support the ground commanders, and they continue to strike key strategic targets.
Coming up later, General Schwartzkoff's complete statement on Operation Desert Storm and the question and answer session that followed. Off the Kuwaiti coast, planes took off from U.S. aircraft carriers. U.S., British, and Saudi warships hunted mines, and Kuwaiti ships joined them in bombarding Iraqi positions. The USS Missouri was one of those ships. The Missouri, or Big Mo, lobbed 1-ton shells from its 16-inch guns into Kuwait. Schwartzkoff says the naval forces have conducted amphibious missions, but did not say if or where a U.S. Marine Amphibious Task Force has landed.
As the ground war goes on in Kuwait, we take you to Amman, Jordan. CNN's Taylor Henry is standing by live there with a view from there. Taylor.
Molly, the reaction of most Jordanians to the outset of the ground war in Kuwait can be summed up in one word: anger. While Jordan's government is standing by its policy of neutrality in the war, public opinion here is clearly on the side of Jordan's Arab Muslim brother, Iraq. Tonight outside the U.S. Embassy in Amman, a group of women and children held a demonstration in protest of the Allied ground offensive in Kuwait. Scores of women and children waved Iraqi and Palestinian flags, sang Palestinian songs, and expressed their support for Saddam Hussein. But while violence was reported at some demonstrations today in Amman, this one was peaceful. Throughout Jordan, people in coffee shops and elsewhere are closely following the Gulf combat, glued to television sets for the latest information. Jordan's parliament met in special session to discuss the crisis today. Jordan's government issued a statement condemning the attack and calling for efforts to secure a ceasefire. Referring to the failed Soviet peace initiative, the statement said in part, quoting now, "This new aggression goes beyond the framework of international legality because Baghdad had accepted to withdraw from Kuwait," end quote. And so, anger is the mood in Jordan, anger that the U.S. is launching this invasion against Iraq inside Kuwait, and anger that a Muslim Arab neighbor is being attacked. Taylor Henry, CNN, reporting live from Amman, Jordan.
Now let's go live to CNN's Linda Scherzer in Jerusalem. Linda.
Dave, from the sidelines, the Israelis are watching this ground offensive very intently, a war that will have a direct impact on Israel's future national security. The Israelis are not used to holding such a passive role in this war, in any Middle Eastern war, but they are not itching to get into this one either. And that's because they have great confidence in the U.S. and its allies. They believe that this may be the beginning of the end, and they believe that the United States will get the job done. The Israeli government had little doubt that the war would inevitably come to this. The cabinet expressed full support for the ground war.
There's a great deal of admiration in Israel for President Bush's leadership and total support for the policy that's been adopted.
And wished the U.S. and its allies luck in defeating their enemy and Israel's.
It has to lead to the complete military destruction of Iraq, and that will have a good effect on the next stage, which is the search for political solutions.
The government had watched with increasing frustration Iraqi Scud attacks against Israel, agreeing to restraint for now, but promising retaliation later. But there is a sense now that the U.S. may just complete the job for Israel.
The assessment here that maybe by tomorrow there will be no enemy.
Confidence is so high that schools stayed open today, unlike at the start of the war. But students, as the rest of the population, are heeding warnings to carry their gas masks at all times.
Last 2 days, we haven't brought them, a lot of people, but today everybody brings them again.
New fears on the street that Saddam may launch a suicide mission, a chemical attack. But even that hasn't diminished the confidence that, thanks to the U.S., Israel's own nightmare may soon be over.
I feel they're doing the right job and go for it, as they say.
Nearby in Arab East Jerusalem, the mood was somber. Palestinians in the occupied territories were placed under another strict curfew. Their cities and towns closed military zones. The Arabs here are worried and angry.
I am sad for this, what it happens. Really, nobody they want the war.
Every Muslim must go to al-jihad to kill American and Israel and everybody who kill our Muslim people in Iraq.
Palestinians are also warning the U.S. to be prepared for the consequences of its actions today.
The American will be forced in the future to keep here something like 500,000 soldiers just to keep the order.
One Israeli radio journalist who's been closely monitoring the war imposed self-censorship this morning. So great is Israel's stake in this war that Mickey Gordis refuses to listen to American communications, not wanting to divulge any information that could be harmful to U.S. troops fighting in Kuwait. It is nighttime now in Israel, a time when most people are close to their homes, and nobody is discounting the possibility that in spite of those early positive reports out of Saudi Arabia, that things could take a bad turn. Israelis recall that after the war started last month, when reports out of Saudi Arabia were so positive, when Israelis thought they would be on the sidelines in this war, just a few hours later, the first Scud was launched towards Israel. And so nobody is discounting the fact, the grim possibility that things could take a turn for the worse. This is Linda Scherzer reporting live from Jerusalem.
Thank you, Linda.
Later in this hour, we're going to take you live to Saudi Arabia for some Kuwaiti reaction to the ground war.
And later today on CNN, we will carry live at 2 p.m. Eastern Time a live address by the French President Francois Mitterrand. Stay with us.
The commander of Allied forces for Operation Desert Storm says he is delighted with the progress of the ground campaign so far. General Norman Schwartzkoff spoke to reporters today in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Here are his comments in their entirety.
Afternoon. Thank you for coming. As you know, last night at his briefing, Secretary Cheney mentioned that in the critical early stages of a military operation, it's absolutely imperative to deny the enemy any information on the disposition, actions, or plans of our forces. For that reason, he stated that we were going to temporarily suspend the daily scheduled briefings both in the Pentagon and here in Riyadh. Secretary Cheney also said, however, that he wanted to keep the American public informed whenever possible with periodic updates. The purpose of my comments at this time is to give you a brief assessment of the progress to date of the ground phase of Operation Desert Storm. The contents of my briefing will be limited to the release of information which we feel will not jeopardize the progress of our operations, nor will it in any way endanger the lives of our troops on the battlefield. I know that you will understand our great concern for the operational security, and I also know that the American people would demand nothing less. Let me first make the point that this is an initial update, and it's based on preliminary reports from commanders in the field. These reports may change or be refined in the hours ahead. At 0400 hours local this morning, coalition forces began a major ground, naval, and air offensive to eject Iraqi forces from Kuwait. I want to emphasize, this is a coalition effort. The countries participating so far are the United States, Saudi Arabia, United Kingdom, France, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, Syria, and of course, Kuwait. U.S. forces in this morning's attack were U.S. Marines, Army paratroopers, Army Air Assault Forces, and Army Special Forces. These forces, along with French and Arab forces, have already reached all of their first-day objectives and are continuing their attack. Early this afternoon, U.S. Army Mechanized and Armored Forces, along with the forces of the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Egypt, and Syria, also launched attacks, and they are moving north with great speed. With the exception of one early afternoon engagement between the Marine Task Force and an Iraqi armor unit, contact with the enemy can best be characterized as light. Coalition air forces from the United States, the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Italy, Canada, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Qatar are all conducting surge air operations to support the ground commanders, and they continue to strike key strategic targets. United States, United Kingdom, Saudi, and Kuwaiti naval forces are conducting carrier air, mine sweeping, naval gunfire support, and of course amphibious missions along the east coast of Kuwait. 10 hours into this ground offensive, more than 5,500 prisoners have been captured. And we received reports of many hundreds more north of our positions with white surrender flags. Friendly casualties have been extremely light. As a matter of fact, remarkably light. So far, the offensive is progressing with dramatic success. The troops are doing a great job, but I would not be honest with you if I didn't remind you that this is the very early stages. We are a little more than 12 hours into this offensive, and the war is not over yet. That concludes my prepared comments, and I'm now ready to take a very few questions. Richard?
General Schwartzkoff, can you give us an idea of how long, based on what you know now, and things go according to plan, how long would you anticipate this thing is going to last, and how do you account for the fact that the opposition has been so light so far?
I would first of all say that the opposition has probably been so light so far because of the excellent job that all of the forces to date have done in preparing the battlefield. With regard to your second question, it's impossible to say how long it's going to take. Let me put it this way, it's going to take as long as it takes for the Iraqis to get out of Kuwait and the United Nations resolutions to be enforced.
We're talking about, sir, there have been some reports today, and I know this might be an ongoing situation, but can you at least tell us whether we have any forces in Kuwait City? There have been reports of some paratroopers seen over Kuwait City, these reports by Kuwaiti residents.
I'm not going to in any way discuss the location of any of the forces involved in the battle to date.
General, have any U.S. or Allied troops encountered chemical or biological weapons?
We've had some initial reports of chemical weapons, but those reports to date, as far as we're concerned, have been bogus. There have been no reported chemical weapons used thus far.
General, would you say the campaign so far is going better than you'd expected at this stage, or about on par, or slightly worse?
I would say that so far we're delighted with the progress of the campaign.
General, you said that with one exception, the contact with the enemy was described, you said light.
Yes.
Can you provide any details at all about the exception?
Yeah, this afternoon, about 2 hours ago, one of the Marine Task Forces was counterattacked with enemy armor. The Marines immediately brought their own artillery to bear. They also brought their anti-tank weapons to bear. We also brought our air forces to bear, and the counterattack was very quickly repulsed, and they retreated. I can't tell you the exact number of lost tanks, but there were several tanks that were lost in that particular battle. About 2 more questions. Over here.
Has the resistance been light because the Iraqis are retreating, or are they simply not engaging you? Are they surrendering? I mean, what exactly are they doing?
All of the above.
General, you say the opposition is light. Is this because you have avoided a frontal confrontation with them? Are you going around or over, and is that why there's little opposition?
We're going to go around, over, through, on top, underneath, and any other way.
Have you gone through, sir? Is that why it's light?
One more question.
General, have you encountered the Republican Guard yet?
Some.
What kind of resistance have you gotten from them?
All right, last question.
General, are you going to pursue the Iraqi soldiers into Iraq, or are you going to stop at the Kuwait-Iraq border?
I'm not going to answer that question. We're going to pursue them in any way it takes to get out of Kuwait. Thank you very much.
U.S. military officials have suspended normal press briefings for the time being in favor of some occasional updates. Our military analyst, General Perry Smith, joins us now. General Smith, surprised by anything you've seen, anything you've heard?
A couple of surprises. One, no chemicals. Most people thought they would be using chemicals when they got into this defensive position. We haven't seen any yet. I hope that we don't see any. The other surprise is most analysts said 2 or 3 weeks of ground combat. Looks like it could be something like 2 or 3 days, so it's really going fast.
Are you surprised by the Schwartzkoff statement that they've already encountered some Republican Guard?
No, because they move so fast and they have the ability to move fast. That's the beauty of this particular set of forces. They have very speedy ability to move in with airborne folks and with the tanks very quickly, so they're into the Republican Guards already.
Okay, General Perry Smith, our military analyst. Thanks for that, Dave.
A programming note that at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, CNN will be carrying live an address by French President Francois Mitterrand. That's at 2 p.m. Eastern Time today on CNN. Our coverage of Desert Storm will continue right after this. The first press reports from the war zone indicate a well-coordinated offensive among the coalition members. Jeffrey Archer takes a look at Allied strategy in the first day of the ground war.
The speed of the Allied attack will be the key to any quick victory. The philosophy of the Allied armies is to move fast with surprise and great force, a philosophy designed to encircle rapidly the Iraqi army's static defenses. The Allies have invaded Iraq and Kuwait across a wide front. British armors believed to be well to the west of Kuwait, with French and American units sweeping through Iraq to attack the Republican Guard forces dug in southwest of Basra. This morning, French sources reported them 40 miles inside Iraq, heading for the Euphrates. The oil town of Wafra was an early Allied goal. Troops, including Kuwaitis, are reported to have reached Jahra, 20 miles west of Kuwait City, possibly by helicopter. If true, this could cut off Kuwait City from Iraqi reinforcements. U.S. Marines are reported to have captured the island of Failaka, a vital move if further Marine landings on the coast of Kuwait are to take place. Iraq's defensive line seems to have been breached in several places. For days, fuel air bombs have been dropped on minefields. The huge downward blast detonates mines buried in the sand. Before the offensive began, napalm was dropped on the trenches filled with oil to set them alight before the Iraqis could use them as a defense. In London, exiled Kuwaitis who don't wish to be identified claim inside information as to how the war is going.
Tomorrow is 25th of February, is the Independence Day of Kuwait.
And we're hoping by tonight Kuwait is liberated, so we have a joyous Independence Day tomorrow.
Is that a hope or is that a belief based on the information that you're getting?
Well, we are close to that. I think we feel confidence that it's not something that is unachievable. It looks that it's going well.
Reports from Saudi Arabia say Iraqi soldiers are surrendering in their thousands. If true, it'll help ensure the war is as short and sharp as the Allied commanders have planned.
The Kuwaiti news agency says Allied troops recaptured Kuwait City within hours after the ground war began, but that report cannot be confirmed. And U.S. military officials will say only that the coalition met its first day objectives. CNN's Mike Shinoy joins us live from Saudi Arabia now with Kuwaiti reaction to the Gulf developments.
First, a quick update. There are a lot of reports floating around. Very few of them can be confirmed. Basically, Allied Commander General Norman Schwartzkoff has told us that things are going remarkably well. Lots of Iraqi prisoners, lots of Allied progress. There are unconfirmed, and I repeat, unconfirmed reports about the Allies reaching the outskirts of Kuwait City, but we have no way to confirm that. With me now is Ambassador Abdullh Bishara, a Kuwaiti diplomat who, for the last decade or so, has been the Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council. That's an organization of 6 Gulf states dealing with regional issues. Ambassador, let me ask you first of all, do you have any information from Kuwaiti sources, you yourself are a Kuwaiti, about what may be going on inside Kuwait at this time?
I have 2 things. One is jubilation by the Kuwaitis inside Kuwait. The day of emancipation has dawned on them. Second, a terrifying reign of terror the Iraqi unleashed. Unfortunately, Iraqi soldiers there, with the breakdown of law and order, started to unleash a campaign of terror against our kith and kin. On the military side, I knew that the Kuwaitis are close to the outskirts of the second city in Kuwait called Jahra. Now, I'm not sure about the Allies are very close to the city of Kuwait. We, the Kuwaitis, pray that the Allies will not suffer as many casualties as one would imagine in such a campaign of such a magnitude.
Let me ask you about the goals of the war. Do you see any way in which your country or the other Gulf countries can have a secure future if Saddam Hussein remains in power, or does Saddam have to go before this mission can be successfully completed?
Well, Mike, there are 3 things. One is the emancipation of Kuwait. Second is the restoration of law and order. Third is international legitimacy. Now, whether Saddam Hussein remains or not, but this is not my concern. This is the Iraqi people's concern. What we should emphasize is that in his presence, I will not imagine unity. In his presence, I will not imagine harmony. In his presence, I will not imagine prosperity or regional understanding. In his absence, we will have regional understanding. In his absence, we will have what we call harmony, relaxation, and emphasis on prosperity. Now, I'm not going to write the obituary of the regime. The Iraqi people should decide that.
Let me ask you, when Kuwait is finally liberated, there's going to be a tremendous mess that the Allies and the Kuwaitis are going to encounter. How concerned are you about the difficulties of reestablishing a legitimate functioning government? Are you concerned about reprisals against, for example, Palestinians who stayed in Kuwait who may have collaborated with the Iraqis?
Mike, I am totally against what we call witch hunting. We will not tolerate it. Whoever collaborated with Iraq should be subjected to the law of Kuwait. I will never accept really the chasing out of Palestinians at random and indiscriminately. Second, the Kuwaitis are very people of expertise, and I'm not worried about the speedy restoration of law and order and services. Third, we have expertise from the United States and from the Allies. And in collaboration with the Allies, we will be able to resolve these things.
Our discussion was briefly interrupted by an ally aircraft going overhead. I think that's about all the time we have. Ambassador Abdullh Bishara, Secretary General of the Gulf Cooperation Council, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mike.
I'm Mike Gen P, CNN, reporting live from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia.
Thank you, Mike. When our live coverage continues, we'll have more and an update on the war in the Gulf, plus a special assignment report on how the war may turn the PLO into a major casualty.
This is CNN.
An update now on the Gulf War. Allied forces are sweeping into Kuwait and Iraq, and early reports say they are meeting little resistance. Kuwaiti sources say Allied troops have taken control of the strategic Kuwaiti island of Flaylaka. A Baghdad radio message denies that report. Kuwait's news agency says ground forces have also reached the town of Jarrah, but information is sketchy and conflicting because of an Allied news blackout. Troops from at least 7 nations have crossed into Kuwait and Iraq. Desert Storm Commander General Norman Schwartzkoff says 5,500 Iraqi soldiers have been taken prisoner in the first 10 hours of the operation. And he said resistance has been light. Resistance may increase when Allied forces encounter Iraq's elite Republican Guard. Military sources say some troops are driving across southern Iraq to cut off Iraqi troops in Kuwait and confront the Republican Guard. Leaders of one French division say they have moved 30 miles into Iraq and captured 1,000 prisoners. It is unclear whether those prisoners are in addition to those announced by General Schwartzkoff. Pool reporters aboard ships in the Gulf report a U.S. battleship Missouri has been lobbing huge shells into Kuwait. One correspondent says Kuwait appears to be on fire. U.S. military vehicles are moving into Kuwait in convoys. Kuwait's news agency says Allied troops have parachuted into Kuwait City and have already taken control, but that report has not been confirmed. Kuwaiti sources say Iraqi troops are blowing up major buildings in Kuwait City, including the Parliament building.
John Holloman is standing by. John Holloman, come in. John.
Yes, Dave. Here at the White House, we're getting a great deal of information, not in very specific detail, but at least some of it seems to be encouraging to officials here. President Bush getting his news of the ground war from his national security staff, and the news he's getting, as I say, seems to be encouraging to him. Mr. Bush went to a private church service today with about 100 cabinet members and White House staffers and their families. Defense Secretary Cheney sat behind the president in church. After the service, Cheney offered some up-to-the-minute assessment of the ground war situation, first to the president and then to the rest of us.
The campaign is going very well. I think it's safe to say it's gone better than expected, but this is only the first day. We still have a long ways to go, and I'd rather be cautious than overly optimistic.
Deputy National Security Advisor Robert Gates says there's been surprisingly little opposition from the Iraqis in Kuwait so far, but an even bigger surprise to Gates is what they're doing to Kuwait and the Kuwaiti people.
Well, beginning about midweek, they began to torch on a large scale oil wells and other oil facilities in Kuwait. We now have something on the order of 300 wells that have been torched, apparently 200 just in the last couple of days or so. Storage tanks, gathering centers, and so on. They're basically trying to destroy the entire oil infrastructure of Kuwait.
Mass murders of civilians we've heard about?
We are hearing reports of large-scale executions and torture, mutilation.
From whom, Mr. Gates? How reliable are these people you're hearing from?
Well, we're hearing some of it from the Kuwaiti resistance. We're hearing some of it from the Kuwaiti government. We're hearing some of it from deserters. We're hearing some of it from people who have managed to get out of Kuwait. There are enough stories from enough different sources that give us confidence that there's a great deal of credibility in these stories.
Despite the reports that coalition ground forces have pushed from the south and from the west all the way to Kuwait City, National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft says the war's not over yet.
Well, my fears are that there's too much optimism. You know,
The operations are going well, but he still does have a very formidable army, and I think we need to be cautious about euphoria.
Schwartzkoff seems to be worried that tomorrow's headlines might be those similar to those that showed up in newspapers the day after the air war began, which said that the Iraqi forces were decimated. He doesn't want people to be too optimistic about that because he believes, as do most of the people here at the White House, including the president, that this war is going to take several more days to get to a point where officials will even know how close they are to being able to end it. John Holloman, CNN Live at the White House.
Thank you for that, John. The commander of Operation Desert Storm says Allied forces have encountered some of Iraq's Republican Guards, but General Schwartzkoff declines to say what kind of resistance that elite Iraqi unit is putting up. The Pentagon places great importance on the well-equipped and well-trained Republican Guard. Joining us now for some insight into that formidable force is military analyst Richard Jupa. He joins us live from New York. Mr. Jupa is a former Navy officer who now writes about military issues, and he has an article on the Republican Guard in next month's issue of Army Magazine. Welcome to CNN. What do you think about the Republican Guard at this point in time? Have they been pounded enough, or are they going to put up extreme resistance against those Allied forces that are moving towards them?
I believe that the attrition rates that have been given out by Central Command up to recently have been largely accurate, but we have to remember that they're counting machines and not manpower. There's no way to tell from the bombing how large a percentage of the manpower of the Guards has been turned into casualties.
Let's talk about the numbers then, as you know them to be. How many Republican Guards are there? What are we talking about as far as a force number is concerned?
Well, one thing to remember is that not all of the Guards are in the Basra Kuwaiti border area that has been targeted. Saddam Hussein has kept certain other divisions closer to his centers of power. There's a division in Baghdad, for instance. There's, as of late December, early January, there were 2 more that were located around Karbala. There were also, supposedly in early January, 5, quote, new divisions of Republican Guards that were raised from reservists, calling the cream of reservists. These, of course, don't have the training or equipment of the senior divisions.
But are we talking thousands, hundreds of thousands? How many?
I would say in the Basra area, there are Republican Guard divisions per se, or there were before the bombing occurred, about 70,000 Republican Guards. 2 armored, a mechanized division, motorized division. They have attached to them, and probably under their core command in that region, some regular Army armored divisions.
What are they going to hit, excuse me, I'm sorry, what are they going to hit the Allies with as the Allies come towards them? What's their best armament?
Oh, their best armament is the T-72 M1 tank. This is the, there were about 500 of these that the Guards had in their armored divisions down in that area. These had thicker turn armor, they had night scopes. These would be the heaviest armor unit that they would come at the Allies with. But they also have pretty powerful artillery. It's believed that all the mobile artillery, or most of it in the Iraqi army, is concentrated in the Guards divisions.
I'm running out of time, but let me ask you a brief question. If chemical weapons are used, will the Republican Guards be the one to use them?
I believe so, yes.
All right, thank you very much. Richard Jupa, military analyst, joining us from New York today. We thank him for that. David?
Thank you, Molly. We are being joined now by the English language news director of Yemen TV, Ali Al-Sabri, and we appreciate your joining us. Can you tell us exactly what you have learned about how this ground war is going?
Well, we have learned that it started today morning, and we, of course, expected that after all the, the peace initiatives came to a deadlock, and then we expected that, and even the Yemeni citizens woke up and they heard that the ground battle started, and in regard to that, anti-war demonstrations took place here in the capital, Sana'a, where angry citizens came out to the streets to express their outrage and to condemn the ground attack carried by the U.S.-led forces in Iraq and Kuwait.
How large were those protests?
Sorry?
How large were those protests in the streets?
I think protesters, thousands of protesters, in fact, here in the capital Sana'a and in other governorates in the Republic of Yemen, not only the capital but other major cities, where all the people went out to the streets where they angrily voiced their support for Iraqi people and condemning this barbaric attack designed to destroy Iraqi military, economic and development potentials, especially after Iraq showed a good response and a favorable response to the peace initiatives.
You are the English news director for Yemeni TV. How much time is being given to this coverage of this war on your TV?
Well, I think, as you know, that we have this total blackout of the news, and this, of course, was announced early morning by, State Dick Cheney, the Minister of Defense, and that means we cannot really have that large coverage. But whatever we have got from different sources and whatever is available in our hands, we just directly show it to the audience, and we are really covering every minute that we have. Just now the Air Vision News that we have about 1 hour and 15 minutes, but we have got almost good news in that, and we straight ahead we just show the people all what we have got from different sources.
All right, we want to thank Ali Al-Sabri from Yemeni TV. He is director of English language. He is the news director, English language news director of Yemeni TV. Thank you. Our coverage of the war in the Gulf will continue right after this.
While most of the attention in the Gulf War is focused on the combatants, there may be another big loser in the conflict. CNN Special Assignment reporter Mark Beilstein examines how the Persian Gulf War may turn the Palestine Liberation Organization into a major casualty.
All over the Mideast, Palestinians cheer Saddam Hussein. They cheer his missile attacks on Israel. They cheer his call for a Palestinian homeland. But for Yasser Arafat and his Palestine Liberation Organization, this is a time of trouble.
We consider this war is a catastrophe, not only for the Arab nation, for the whole world. There will be no winner in this war.
Certainly Yasser Arafat will be no winner. Virtually alone among Arab leaders, he has embraced Saddam Hussein, shattering support for the PLO in much of the Middle East. For Palestinians, the Gulf War is not going well.
Every bomb dropped on Iraq today by the U.S. and by the Allied forces to try to destroy the military infrastructure of Saddam Hussein. At the same time, it is destroying the hopes and aspirations of the Palestinian people who have placed all their hopes on Saddam Hussein to try to find a solution for their problem.
Their problem, of course, is that the Palestinians have no homeland. But ironically, by supporting Iraq, the PLO may have made a Palestinian state even more unlikely.
If Iraq loses, and since the PLO has betted on Iraq, then the PLO would have nobody in the Arab world to provide it with any kind of support.
That support is dwindling already. In Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states, which once bankrolled the PLO, government officials have publicly shut off the spigot. In Jordan, tens of thousands of Palestinians have fled from Kuwait, the latest wave of Palestinian refugees in a history of homelessness. In Israel, authorities have clamped down on Palestinians in the occupied territories, setting rigid curfews, arresting moderate leaders. In Lebanon, Palestinian guerrillas have been under attack from an unusual alliance of Israel and Syria. And throughout the Mideast, Palestinians have been murdering each other in factional fighting.
There's a civil war going on within the Palestinian community. It's just as serious a war in many ways as the larger war.
In the smaller war, 4 PLO officials have been assassinated in the past month in 2 separate incidents. Among the victims, Abu Iyad, Yasser Arafat's leading deputy and heir apparent. But despite this violence, the PLO's official U.S. spokesman downplays any difficulties.
We have never had such a cohesion within the Palestinian leadership as we have it now.
How do you explain the assassination of Abu Iyad?
I said this is an incident that happened, and it is not very uncommon. People die either of natural causes or of assassinations.
Among Arafat's key lieutenants, there is now said to be discord and dissension. There is even talk that Arafat himself may soon retire, leading to further bloodshed as rivals and one-time supporters vie to replace him.
The Saudis may be interested, as well as the Gulf states and some other Arab countries, they may be interested in creating some alternative leadership to the PLO. And if they perceive that as an aim and as an objective, they will be willing to pump some money in that direction.
Still, Arafat and the PLO have confounded their critics before. Already, PLO officials are trying to minimize Arafat's embrace of the Iraqi leader.
Yasser Arafat embraced Saddam Hussein in the same way he embraced King Fahd, and in the same way he embraced Hosni Mubarak, and in the way he embraced all his Arab colleagues who are heads of states in the Arab world.
But while Arafat once embraced his Arab colleagues, many are no longer embracing him. And while Palestinians still rally to the PLO's banner, the cheering may stop if Iraq loses its war against the West. In the weeks ahead, as the war in the Gulf continues, the Palestinians may once again find themselves the casualty nobody notices. Mark Feldstein, CNN Special Assignment.
If you'd like to write to the Special Assignment staff, the address is Post Office Box 2727, Atlanta, Georgia, 30301.
As our coverage of the ground war in the Persian Gulf continues, we want to remind you about a program tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. CNN's Larry King will have a live special. That's tonight on CNN at 9 p.m. Eastern. We will be back.